All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Redevelopment Commission meeting on November 7th, 2022. The first item of business is roll call.
Deb Hutton here.
Deborah Meyerson here.
Martha Street.
Sarah Bowerly-Dansman here.
Cindy Canarney here. All right, staff present.
John Zodi, Hand Department.
Christina Finley, Hand Department.
John Hewitt, Hand Department.
Cody Toothman, Hand Department.
Barry Collins, Hand Department.
Matt Swinney, Hand Department.
Patrick Lucas, Engineering Department.
I think Mr. Crowley will be here shortly. He just stepped out for a minute.
Okay. All right, moving on to the first item of business, reading of the minutes for October 17th, 2022, and executive summary for October 17th, 2022. Are there any questions from commissioners? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Deb Hutton, I'll make a motion to accept the reading, to approve the reading of the minutes for October 17th, 2022, and the executive summary for October 17th, 2022, as written.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. No one opposed? All right. Next item of business is examination of claims for October 14th, 2022 for $33,724.07. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll make a motion to approve the examination of claims from October 14th for $33,704.07.
And Sarah Bowerly-Dansman, I'll second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No one opposed? Claims pass. Next item of business, examination of payroll registers, October 21st, 2022 for $35,670.89. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Sarah Bowerly-Dansman, I'll motion to approve the examination of, or payroll registers for October 21st, 2022 for $35,670.89.
Deb Hutton, second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Moving on. Is there a director's report?
There is briefly, Madam President, got a lot of business tonight, but just a couple of things. We'll let the commission know that the department will be working on a home ARPA allocation plan. So the home program through HUD is one of our entitlement community funding streams that we get from HUD. And so there was $2 million of ARPA money that was awarded, allocated to the city. And so we have an allocation plan due to HUD. Basically, I'm going to say by March 1st. It's by the end of March, but it requires some public comment. So we'll be working on that with those in the community who provide services to those who are unhoused and at risk of being unhoused, and all in support of housing, obviously. So we'll be working on that over the next couple of months. With the holidays, March 1st is very quick. Second, you'll have rehab guidelines to consider for the November 21st meeting. Have a couple of those to discuss tonight, so I wanted to let you know an update on those. And then third, the city applied for a grant through the READY program to support infrastructure development at Hopewell. So this is to support the construction of a portion of Jackson Street that will be just behind the core building, which we hope to have affordable housing there. So we've applied for that. I put together the grant application along with engineering and hope to hear on that by the end of the year. So that was for almost $2 million for the construction of that. So those are the three updates from hand tonight.
All right, thank you. Is there a legal report?
Mr. Allen is on his way, I think. So I might go back to him, or there's some other legal updates. We'll see if he has anything when he comes in. He's, I think, getting something finalized.
Okay.
And then, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask about a treasurer's report.
Is Mr. Underwood on?
Nope.
Okay.
All right.
And Mr. Crowley's going to skip business update because he's got stuff later. So.
Okay. All right, perfect. All right, well, let's move on to new business. So I would like to handle all the resolutions dealing with CDBG funding in one block if we can. So could someone briefly walk us through these,
Sure.
please?
Thank you. Hand will speak to that tonight. We've got our program staff here with us, Cody Toothman and Matt Swinney. You have before you 17 resolutions, 9 for physical improvements totaling $785,000, and 8 for CDBG social services totaling $130,872. These were approved by the Redevelopment Commission earlier this year, so this kind of rounds out our process for getting this money started. So it takes a period of time for the funding agreements to be authorized until HUD approves our annual action plan, which got done in September. And so this just allows the program recipients to move ahead with their programs. They are allowed to date back to June 1st for their activity because that's the beginning of the HUD program year. So these agreements are simply to begin their programs. Happy to answer any questions about those. You all did approve these, like I said earlier this year. We are going to start our 2023 round of CDBG in December, so this process is getting ready to start again. And so we're happy to answer any questions about those. Larry, they were just saying that they'd like to take these all in one block for voting. So
as long as it's made clear, we should, whenever we're taking a vote, read through each of the titles to make clear that it's on the agenda and that everybody understands what we're talking about. But otherwise, that's fine.
okay.
Well, I'd like to ask a couple of clarifying
No,
questions.
please.
So since this was new for me, this process, so I thought when we met, last January and March, that was, we ranked and chose, I was on physical improvements and Deborah was doing social services. But then realized that that was just tentative based on the amount we thought we would have. Then you found out in midsummer the actual amount, so then we went back again, said add, subtract, re-rank, whatever. But then nothing happened until September when HUD said, yeah, approval for Bloomington's CBD grants.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're actually approving paying those various recipients we picked for the specific amounts, but they don't get paid until, well, and then that's the next question. They really don't take action on this until 2023. So we take a year's process to assign amounts to organizations, and then the next year they get to do those things. Is that correct? Like a 2-year process?
Not 2-year, but they will go, the program year runs from June 1st to May 31st. So we start that process before the program year where they can expend money begins. Now what inevitably happens is that June 1st comes and things aren't ready to go because our action plan maybe has not been approved. This year there was a delay. As you all remember, I think I reported that we did the action plan, we got it up for public comment, got it ready to submit, and then they said, wait a minute, wait until we have your exact amounts, and then Congress did their thing. So that delayed it by about a month. And so they finally approved it in September. And so these are the funding agreements to say, here are all the stipulations around your program, go.
Okay.
But you can count back on expenses back to June 1st. So that allows them to backdate some of their expenses so that they can fulfill activity during the program year, which runs from June 1st. The amount of time they have to spend money is June 1 to May 31st.
So knowing that we approved it, even if HUD hadn't, Boys and Girls Clubs with their security processes they wanted to pay for could have started June the 2nd to pay, actually put them in process, trusting that we and HUD would cross with the money.
They understand that they can't do that without some risk until we tell them you're okay to backdate it to June 1st. Some people won't, because if it's, especially in physical improvements, they'll do, they may do the construction in a couple months or something, but for social services, some of them will do that, but some of them won't. They'll wait until they get the funding agreement done. They just have, the program year will end May 31st.
So some of these, I read through some, I looked especially to the physical improvement ones, since I was part of that team, and some of them say they have till December 30th, 2023 to spend the money.
Yeah, the agreements can be extended, and some
they
of them
can,
are, they can be extended out.
And then they have to spend the money and submit the bill to you?
Yeah, so that's the other thing, I didn't answer that.
Roof,
Yeah, so,
here's the
so
bill, pay
this is
back.
all based on reimbursements, so we're not actually spending any money tonight. We are just authorizing the agreements that will allow them to start that. It is reimbursements. They submit claims to the office. And Cody or Matt does the initial review, then Christina and I do the second round, and we
Right.
sign off on them, and they go to the controller for payment.
Thanks.
Yep.
And then I'll just say that for the physical improvement ones, those are as our committee chose. They were all accurate and
That's right.
appropriate. So
That's right,
thanks.
guys. Are there any changes that we report, right? Yep. Okay.
So as far as the resolutions, to Larry's point, so tonight we're talking about resolution 22-68, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Bloomington Cooperative Living physical improvements. Resolution 22-69, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Boys and Girls Club physical improvements. Resolution 22-70, approval of CDBG funding agreement for City of Bloomington utilities physical improvements. Resolution 22-71, approval of CDBG funding agreement for City of Bloomington engineering physical improvements. Resolution 22-72, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Life Designs physical improvements. Resolution 22-73, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Monroe County United Ministries physical improvements. Resolution 22-74, approval of CDBG funding agreement for New Hope for Families physical improvements. Resolution 22-75, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Summit Hill Community Development Corporation physical improvements. Resolution 22-76, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Tandem Community Birth Center physical improvements. Resolution 22-77, approval of CDBG funding agreement for New Life Social Service. Resolution 22-78, approval of CDBG funding agreement for New Hope for Families Social Service. Resolution 22-79, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Middleway House Social Service. Resolution 22-80, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Mother Hubbard's Cupboard Social Service. Resolution 22-81, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Hoosier Hills Food Bank Social Service. Resolution 22-82, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Community Kitchen Social Service. Resolution 22-83, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Boys and Girls Club Social Service. And Resolution 22-84, approval of CDBG funding agreement for Beacon Inc. Social Service. Are there any other comments or questions from commissioners? If not, I'll entertain a motion for Resolution 22-68 through 22-84.
This is Deborah Meyerson. I'll make a motion to approve resolutions 22-68 through 22-84. Thank you.
Deb Hutton, I'll second the motion.
We have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Resolutions 22-68 through 22-84 have been approved. Next item of business is Resolution 22-85, approval to increase funding for an owner-occupied rehab at 1017 West Howe. And I believe that there is some additional information that was passed out regarding this.
That's correct. Commissioners, you do have the printout of the work write-up that was done here by staff and by the contractor. So what we have is a rehab at 1017 West Howe that does exceed the program caps, which for an owner-occupied rehab, this is what we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks when we look at our guidelines. The owner-occupied rehab limits are $38,500. This bid for the project came in at $41,031.79, which is about $2,500 over the maximum grant amount. When we add in contingencies of 10%, the total that we would ask for your consideration of tonight is $45,134.97. The scope of work is quite extensive, and I'll ask staff, Barry and John. Let me just take a minute, if I may, and introduce Barry Collins. Barry has come on as our part-time program staff to work on rehabs, which has been a great asset for the department. Barry, some of you may know Barry because he was the facilities director here at the city for a long time and then worked in hand before that. And he and John Hewitt and Cody Toothman especially have been working to get our rehabs moving. And so these are why you're seeing these tonight. Anything you want to say about the write-up, guys, about the scope of work here? It's a number of things around the house, obviously, but your consideration tonight is being requested because it does exceed that cap. That's why we need your approval of this one tonight. So I'll answer any questions.
Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Will the 3,000 plus additional money make it for this house?
I believe so. That's why we added the contingencies, so you guys.
We hope so. The contingency should cover everything. This house doesn't maybe have so much unforeseen damage that we think that we'll run into major issues. There, I mean, there are always little things that you don't see, but this
So it
one's
seems pretty realistic.
fairly well documented and thought out, and visited the house a number of times and opened up what we could to get view into what was behind some of the stuff that was in place, so that we weren't looking blind or moving blind.
And to kind of refresh our memory, I think that we've had a few of these come up before, and the issue is that the cap is just starting to become problematic because of inflation.
That and just higher construction costs generally. So, and the guidelines that are in place those caps have been in place for quite a while, and so don't probably reflect sort of more modern cost estimates. So we're seeing things, $7,500 is 10, and this, $38,500 is, we're probably looking at raising that to 50 for enough wiggle room in there. So generally, yes.
And last that this issue came up in another context with another unit property. There was a discussion about the possibility of discussing raising the cap. Where is that continued conversations?
Yeah, so those you'll have those to consider for the November 21st meeting. So we worked on them this fall and had not gotten them done yet. So we want to get them done by the end of the year. So November 21st, you'll see those. So what you'll have are the guidelines with a recommended cap increase.
So not to get too far ahead, but would you imagine that if we were to approve what you're asking for, that this would not meet the cap under what?
This one would be okay under the caps. For owner-occupied rehabs, those are the bigger jobs for $38,500. Emergency home repair are, I think we did one earlier this year for $12,000 when it was, that's $7,500. So we're gonna rate those accordingly. The one we'll consider at the end of the agenda tonight is an anomaly, I would say. And,
okay. I'm just asking about this one. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are all my questions.
So just a quick question. Have we spent money on this property prior to tonight?
I do not know. John, do you?
1017 West Howe. No, this is their first time approaching us for this help, and we've done all of the other background stuff. The property is in a historic neighborhood, so there was a trip to the Historic Preservation Commission for permissions to do some of the scope of work that would be under the purview of the HPC. They passed through that and have the permissions in place to make those changes to the exterior of the structure. Basically taking the vinyl siding and off of the house and some of the aluminum cladding that's on the front porch and returning it to a more traditional bungalow style for that neighborhood as part of this scope of work. So.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on Resolution 22-85? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve Resolution 2285.
And Sarah Bowerly Dansman, I'll motion to second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, resolution passes. Next item of business is Resolution 22-86, approval of addendum to design consultant contract for Hopewell Phase 1 East. you'd like to speak to us regarding this?
Patrick Durkis from engineering is speaking at this one and the next one.
Okay.
Hi, Patrick Durkis, Engineering Department. For the Hopewell Phase 1 East project, when we reached about 90% design, was the time period that we took possession of all the necessary properties to seek council approval for the vacation of the alley. There was one property, 605 South Madison, that we were waiting to purchase because without owning that, we'd need the owner support to seek the vacation of the alley. So when we sought the vacation of the alley, council requested some changes to the plans. The addition of 3 alleys that were not originally included in the plans. The addition of those alleys also, in addition to those alleys, it was also requested that we restructure how the lots are placed. To replat land, every parcel has to be provided water and sewer. And so basically the change in the alleys and also the change in the lot layout created nearly a complete redesign of the water, sanitary, and storm for the subdivision. And so working through that with Shrewsbury, we basically, knowing that it was almost complete redesign, we went item by item through their contract of everything that was the original, included in the original contract, and in the same hours to start the design over, basically. Knowing the scope of this contract, we also had a number of allowances that were available in it. And so this change order is significantly reduced from the total actual cost because we're realizing some of the budgets, some of the, just said the word and I'm blanking on it for a moment. Had some of the allowances that were still, that we were able to deduct out of the contract. And then there were some additional items that were added. We added security and surveillance systems for the greenway, the linear park, and then well, yeah, new plat. What else? Those are really the major items that were changed from this, and so that. After deducting for the unused allowances, the total change ended up being $35,637, creating a new contract not to exceed amount for the entire project of $1,084,517. Available for any questions.
Question? When you talk about the security systems for the Greenway, I presume those are permanent installations. Those are not the temporary stuff like we've done for the legacy hospital space. You know, temporary security, roving cars and men. But this is permanent. This is what we want to be in there for when the Greenway is functional, has people walking up and down. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are. We basically looked at the view field based upon the elevations. Found 3 locations for security cameras that will be incorporated into the lighting poles, and then in addition, we also are putting in wireless access points. So basically, we needed to provide fiber for the cameras, so then added wireless access points for the area also. And then this includes basically a waterproof enclosure that will be on site where everything terminates to, and then that all follows the normal city fiber system that goes to be recorded and is also, I believe, I haven't seen it myself, but was told at the police department in the entry, there's multiple screens and it will be part of that system.
Great, thank you.
How do you gauge for a security system of like how many cameras you need for, like, is it per square foot? Is it based on anticipated usage, or how does that work?
This is my first one I've been part of the design for, but the city has used on multiple of these applications a company named Presidio, and this is part of their standard design. So what we really looked at is field of view, where the trees are located, where things like the umbrellas to the stage would block a view, the pavilion structure itself would block a view, and so I think it depends on grade and then other obstructions, and so we're basically the REA, the landscape architect for the project, had a 3D model, including the trees for this project. Trees at a certain stage in growth. It's hard to estimate exactly how they will, but we were able to use that 3D model and basically set cameras and look through view fields for that.
Thank you. One other just quick follow-up. How does the city decide when cameras are used in public spaces, and how does this compare with other public spaces in terms of the installation and use of cameras?
I am not aware of a formal city policy regarding it. I think Parks looked at this very similar to Switchyard, and basically the same steps that were taken at Switchyard were kind of being replicated here. When we initially looked at the project, we thought to just provide the ability to install these in the future. And then as it developed, we realized providing the ability and actually putting in the equipment is not significantly different in cost.
There is a difference, though, in that this is a mix, or ultimately will be a mix of public and private space, whereas a place like Switchyard is all public space. So I'm just, again, trying to just understand the strategy of, like you said, the difference between the capacity and the actual implementation. And since this will ultimately be that mix, and there's a question of whether a security camera that's supposed to be used on public spaces potentially infringing on private space privacy, how does that get decided at this stage, because it's so early in the process?
I do not have an answer for that. We asked and were directed to include the security system for this. Based upon the fields of view, I mean, it definitely will look into private spaces. I think that might be a further question as it develops out, of how we would limit the view, or if view needs to be limited for the space.
And that would be done in consultation with the private property owners when they become, I'm just trying to get a sense, again, because like you said, their initial thought was that the capacity would be there and they'd be installed later. It's just, anyway, it's a concern.
I think it's a very good point. It's one I will think we should discuss further. This will be a Parks maintained facility. ITS will maintain the cameras. So I think with the RDC, we should discuss how future expansion would look and how that negotiation, if necessary, would take place.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? I would just have one comment. I definitely agree with Commissioner Meyerson about the privacy issue and how we look at these cameras for the project ongoing. It seems like that this would be a great time, in my opinion, to stop and kind of think about that, as opposed to, moving forward and just putting cameras without any consideration of how that would infringe upon private space.
I concur. I think it's
As do
a
I.
really, really good point. So I guess the question is, you know, how can we move forward with the resolution today with also kind of that, point? Do we have a sense of how this discussion might influence moving forward?
I guess from my perspective, could we make the approval of the resolution contingent upon additional review of privacy issues regarding camera placement? It's kind of a new phenomenon here, but
So I think what we could commit to easily is commit to certainly bringing up like putting a pin in that and like bringing a review of those dollar amounts and like how those are going to be used in terms of privacy. Now, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense to approve it contingent upon, I mean, unless, I guess I'm trying to understand what the commission wants exactly. Do you want a resolution that says, this is the placement of the camera, these are going to be the placement of the cameras, and here's an analysis of the legal review? Or would you rather have us come up with a report of where those cameras are going to be placed and the assurances that we would take to protect privacy, and then deliver a report back to the RDC about, this is how we have pledged to kind of deal with this particular issue? I just want to understand what's
I'll leave that up to the commissioners.
My suggestion would be that there needs to be a policy in place that is larger than this specific site, that would be, of course, applied to this site, but that this is a question that obviously is not limited to only this site, because we've got 25 acres of this space that may have other cameras into play. So if we have it contingent only on something that's specific to these 3 cameras, that's not really addressing the larger issue. So I'm kind of asking / proposing, is there a way to address this larger question that could then be applied in this context?
So, as Patrick kind of indicated, the primary use of cameras in the city happens a lot on Parks property, which is under the control of the Parks Board and specific to their policies. And so that's where I'm kind of struggling with that in terms of how to deal with that. I'm welcome a further conversation about how we deal with that, how we could work with the Parks Board, because ultimately they do have ultimate authority over their properties and where they put cameras in their policy for cameras as it's set up under the state statutes. Whereas, same with you here, which is this would be your property, although potentially this greenway, once it's turned over, just to be very clear, once it's turned over to, if the Parks Department is going to manage this would ultimately be signed over to the Parks Commission to manage and kind of lease under that same policy. So I'm happy to report back to you and get that information for you from Parks and kind of see what their policy is. I can't speak to it intelligibly. I apologize, Commissioner. And I think that might help address some of those broader concerns. In terms of a citywide policy, that's kind of a different
Or
different
even
matter,
just
of course.
for the Hopewell
Yeah.
space, since that's a very dominant area of a mix of public and private space, of which public funds are being invested, some of which are coming through the RDC, or as RDC as owner of the property. And so currently, until, like you said, it may be turned over at some point to another city agency, but even if it's a policy that just says we recognize that this is a mix of public and private space, and what the communication is supposed to be like with private owners, so that they understand that those security cameras exist. And again, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of angles in terms of managing the privacy concerns that come up, but even if it's eventually Parks that takes it over, that dynamic exists no matter what. So trying to recognize and consider what would be appropriate to address that before it's just plugging in the cameras.
So I guess the other question I have is, is there a specific, and this is the question I guess on the table, which is there a specific amendment to this particular consideration that you're proposing via motion?
So I guess one thing that I'll just throw out there that could help us a little bit is, from my perspective, what I'm interested in is just understanding the plan on how privacy considerations are gonna be addressed for these cameras and any other cameras that we would be, you know, looking to approve funding for going forward on this particular project. And that could be shared at maybe a future meeting or a future discussion for consideration, so as to not hold up this resolution. To me, that sounds fair and appropriate.
Okay.
If other commissioners agree.
Is it appropriate for us to say we go ahead with the resolution, which is spending money on this new contract with its plans, but in retrospect saying still we just want to learn back from the Parks Department or the planning or Shrewsbury what the plans are? Well, if we disapprove of them, then what do? We've already said go ahead and spend the money. Or can we take security out of there? It may not be able to be done physiologically because the wires have to go in the same cable systems as the electricity or whatever else. But can we take security out and say that we pass it as an amendment without security in it? And we'd like to hear back for the next meeting more about addressing our security concerns.
Or as an alternate with what Mr. Doogie said, where it was originally, the plan was to have the infrastructure in there, but the actual cameras were not, at least by my understanding, assigned to be set up. So could that infrastructure, in terms of how this resolution may or may not be amended, could the infrastructure still be there for the security, but the questions about managing privacy appropriately be addressed before cameras are actually installed?
So what you're approving tonight is only the design of the placement of the cameras and the placement of the Wi-Fi and the design of the pole arms to hold the cameras. The construction contract will actually be the purchasing of the actual cameras, and if that is an item that you would like the ability to have a say on at the next, you know, when we go to the construction contract phase, I currently have, the project currently has that all listed as a lump sum, but I can, there's still plenty of time for addendums, and I could add the cameras specifically for a specific approval. Larry might.
Oh, no, so I think that's an excellent point about the design. So what I would suggest, though, in terms of even before the construction phase, because clearly this is a conversation you're all very interested in, before the construction phase, why don't we, and John, we can take this to the thing, why don't we have a discussion? We'll make a specific presentation over security of the site, what our concerns are, what the liability is, and the potential privacy elements. Why don't we plan on doing that as a separate presentation, if that's all right with the commission, independent of this, and certainly ahead of whenever the construction contract would come to you all. So at a meeting that's hopefully not a contract that's before you, but where we can have a broader discussion about the site, because it sounds like the interest is the site as a whole, right? Not this particular little greenway,
It makes
right?
sense as long as
absolutely.
the situation's being addressed,
Okay.
to do it for the site as a whole, given that this issue is likely to recur.
We can do that, absolutely.
And I think this feedback could definitely help shape the design, potentially before we would approve the contract to go ahead and implement or, you know, spend the money on construction.
That's great.
It would definitely be useful to have someone who specializes in privacy law at that meeting. I mean, I'm also thinking about the legal kind of risks that the city would take on if this isn't kind of fully kind of, you know, like thought about, given, you know, what Deborah brought up about kind of, you know, it's a different type of space because it's a mix of public and private, and so I would just like to, you know, learn more. Like, I think that it's a good issue for the city to be ahead on, rather than kind of move forward without kind of considering those potentialities.
All right, I think we have a good plan. Does anybody else have any other questions regarding resolution 22-86? Is there any comment from the public? All right, not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion for Resolution 22-86.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, I motion to approve Resolution 22-86.
Deb Hutton, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, resolution carries. Next item of business is Resolution 22-87, approval of change order for demolition contract for Hopewell Phase 1 East.
Hi, Patrick Durkis with engineering again. Board of Public Works is overlapping, so I'm covering for Matt Smithhurst. During the demolition process, we luckily only had a couple of items pop up. Demoing a large site like this, I think a little bit lucky, but so kind of walking through each one, there were 2 homes that were demolished previously by IU Health along 2nd Street. We had no records regarding how they were done. We didn't know if the foundations were there or anything like that. And so part of our contract was 2 test holes to see if the foundations were there. If the foundations were there, that they should be removed. One thing we had not anticipated was that when they demolished the homes, all the rubble they just pushed into the actual foundations. Our goal is to build a developable site and developable lots, and having unknown rubble in the foundations would have been unacceptable. So we paid for those 2 homes, I believe, is right around $10,000 for that additional rubble. Under the EMS dispatch building, which was also their facility maintenance building, which is 635 South Rogers Street. It was the warehouse that's kind of in the center of the site. When we removed the building and started pulling up the concrete floor, we found large limestone blocks, a type of fill that the contractor and us were not expecting, and again, to create the developable lots, we needed to remove that rubble. That rubble, given the size of the limestone blocks, took a lot more of a significant effort and a haul off. And so that change ended up around $50,000. Looking back at old maps of the area, there was a rail line that cut through the site, and it was stated that one of the buildings there was a stone cutting building. And we also, the developer for the old site next to Switchyard Night Moves had a similar incident as they went to start demoing for their building. I think we've learned that if we see any signs of an old stone cutting building, we should expect a lot of limestone fill probably in the area. And then the last part was on one of the 2nd Street homes that we demolished as part of our contract. There was a black mastic placed on the CMU, the concrete block wall, that when tested positive for asbestos, but was non-friable, so we didn't have to contain the site and remove it. You could remove it, but it had to be a regulated waste to the landfill. I think that was around $2,000. That brings the total contract increase to $63,374.21, with the new contract sum being $652,129.39, or 23 cents. My apologies. Any questions?
Just curious, given that, as you noted, there were certain unknowns with the original demolition, was there any contingency in the original contract? And if so, does this reflect the use of that contingency at all?
So, in the contract we had, we had 3 items that were undistributed quantities. Basically, that means that we want a price for it, but we don't know where we're going to find it or where we might need it. And so that was for what we thought we were going to find areas of contamination. And so we have basically removal of regulated materials, disposal of regulated materials. I'm sorry, it was actually 4. Testing of regulated materials, and then also replacing the regulated materials that were removed with B-Borrow. We found no materials meeting the regulated material classification. So those allowances will actually be a deduct when we get to the end, the final change order for the project. The final quantities are still being worked out, but we should have a final change order hopefully by the next RDC. And so we will have a deduct for all of those. The B-Borrow price protected us in this circumstance for both the house foundations and also for the fill found under 635 South Rogers, because we had to go back with the material. So so we were able to use that B-Borrow price to control our cost. The additional disposal just really was not expecting it and did not have an allowance or a unit price for it. But they provided us tickets. Our inspection team also provided us hours and equipment used. So we were able to have a pretty tight control of what would be a reasonable ask for these efforts.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Any comment from the public? Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion for Resolution 22-87.
This is Deborah Myers. I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 22-87, the approval of change order for the demolition contract for the Warwick Phase 1 East.
Deb Hutton, second.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. Next item is Resolution 22-88, approval of lease for 4th Street Garage, commercial/office space.
So just really quickly, in terms of resolutions 2288 and 2289, we're going to pull these from the agenda to consider those for next time. But we do have a couple of updates we'd like to share with you just in terms of the direction. I don't know, Alex, if you want to go first, I'm happy to fill in.
Yeah, these are kind of real-time moving, and so we have to make a couple of adjustments to the agreements. But directionally, we want you to understand what we're trying to do. So in both cases, so we've got the Trades District garage commercial space, which is about 4,000 square feet. And then we've got, as you may recall, we've got a number of bays that are as part of the 4th Street garage. So one of the reasons we were trying to push urgently on this is because Hoosier Networks is the lessee for the tenant, I guess, for the 4th Street garage. It will take them a while to build that out to their specifications. We have temporarily granted them access and just high-level terms for using a space inside College Square, which you know, is at 200 South College. They are in there, so we're kind of letting them. They are already hiring, and they just needed a place to pop down. So what we're trying to do basically is, in the case of the first resolution, we want to give them a temporary lease agreement for the period that they're going to use to rebuild the other one, and then once they move in, the broad contours of the deal are going to be that they have a baseline amount of rent, that we will be asking the RDC to help fund their build out, and then they will pay that back over a 3-year period. So that's the broad contours of that deal. It's a much more visible site, and so the deal can be a little bit more aggressive. In the case of the Trades District, which is a little bit quieter, we are working right now to with a potential tenant who is trying to figure out how to do the actual construction. That's the moving target in the background right now. They asked us to do it. We're like, nope. So they are trying to find a solution to be able to do that. With that in mind, the slight delay on that is not a big deal. But basically, that deal is that the RDC would actually help fund the build out. Anything in excess of what we would be recommending to you in terms of the tenant improvement. Anything in excess would be paid back over that same 3-year period, but not the baseline amount. We think that that's fair and more reflective of the dynamics of that current space. So those are the contours of the two deals. We will try to lock down some of these moving parts between now and the next meeting and get you a sort of finalized agreement, but we want to make sure that you at least understood what we're trying to accomplish there. See if you have any questions.
Looks like the trades district potential rentor is different from the one you had been anticipating, which was the Mills.
Yeah, so we in that case, the group, which as you may recall, had been acquired by a UK-based company, they were not interested in entering leases for more than a year.
Oh.
And so, which, you know, I think everybody understood that that was just a policy and that they would likely be there for a while, but really that was the only commitment they were willing to make, and we were sorry not to see them as a tenant because we thought it was a good potential placement, but with that parameter in place, we didn't think it was appropriate to recommend that to you.
With this new potential lessee, is there an association kind of or collaboration with IU that's a part of this, or is that totally separate?
It is a collaboration. I actually, and I will come back with a better answer on that, but I think that they are affiliated with the cyclotron, and so I don't know the exact nature of the details of their collaboration, but my understanding is that it's through that general access point that they are affiliated in some way.
Okay.
Because sorry, you keep going, Sarah.
Oh no, I think it's kind of exciting and maybe has a Chips and Science Act component to it. So I'm looking forward to learning more.
Because it's the lab, is it going to be will the build-out be really a scientific, laboratory, electronic, cyclotronic, whatever, space that brings any danger or liability or whatever to a city property or RDC property?
They've assured us that they would be muffling all explosions, and I think they're using it as an office.
Oh, I see. Administrative.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We do include it in our lease agreements a direct prohibition on hazardous materials being kept in the building. So, yeah.
I think it's exciting to see activity in those spaces.
Yeah.
So
It is definitely.
I appreciate the update.
Good activity.
All right. So as we said, we are moving past Resolution 22-88 and 89. Moving on to Resolution 22-90. Approval of payment of legal fees for creation of Meridian Economic Development Area. Who'd like to speak to us regarding this?
So I can speak to this one. So as you all recall, we created a new TIF district, the Spider TIF, that covered the Meridian now Hoosier Networks LLC, going to build out the fiber as part of that. This was our first foray into creating such a TIF, that particular form of TIF. Normally when you create a TIF, you also issue a bond. In this case, it was a financing agreement with the company. As part of that, though, we went to outside specialist counsel for the TIF creation. That was at Barnes and Thornburg, and they have those services they cost $42,000 to set up. That was for everything from beginning to end, so not just the RDC part. It was the creation of the economic development plan. It was attending the meetings. It was advising on the setup of the financing agreement and the project agreement, going to the Economic Development Commission meeting, going to a city council meeting, and advising us all throughout that process. And so it's kind of an all-encompassing deal. It's not terribly unusual for these types of fees to come in, even at this amount for a bond issuance of this. So they're kind of typically done in lump sum, but here we had the itemized account that you all had been able to review for their services. And so this is just to cover that under either the consolidated TIF, this would be at the controller's discretion, but either under the consolidated TIF or potentially the 444 account for the creation of the TIF. And then eventually, as we would see those returns on the TIF for the Spider TIF come back, because remember we reserved about 5% for us for administrative costs, we would kind of refund that money back into those accounts as it comes in.
The amount seemed very appropriate to other deals I've seen, not similar to Spider TIF, but similar to other bond issues.
Yeah, they're in line with the fees we pay for
Yeah.
bond. Just normally you don't see them, just to be clear, normally you don't see them on a bond issue because we pay it directly out of the bond immediately. So at the closing, actually, they're covered kind of at the closing period, so that's why you don't typically see these before you, except in special circumstances.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions regarding Resolution 22-90? Any public comment? Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion on Resolution 22-90.
Deb Hutton, I make a motion to approve Resolution 2290.
Deborah Myerson, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, resolution passes. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 22-91 to increase funding for an owner-occupied rehabilitation project at 301 North Hopewell. Who'd like to speak to us regarding this?
I'll start, Madam President, and I'll ask for staff for backup additional information. So a number of you know about this rehab. I spoke to you about it sort of individually earlier this summer just to sort of get individual guidance, and we didn't at that time need your approval on the expense for the rehab. It was under the cap, but it was a structure that we felt was in such a state of disrepair that we needed to spend money. So I was just kind of getting a little vetting and just some guidance and advice, which I appreciated. So we authorized that work to begin, and excuse me, I'm got a little voice issue tonight too. So that work began in the summer, and we were going to spend, as you'll see in the resolution, that amount was about $28,000. When the work started and continued, we realized there was a lot more to the story on what needed to be done to this house. It is, we found through further investigation, I do want John Hewitt to chime in after I'm done and fill in more professional and technical expertise along with Barry Collins, what I might leave out, but we found out there were a lot more issues here. There had been an infestation of mice, which led to the sort of disintegration of the insulation. The electrical is bad. The heat is not ventilating properly from the floor. It's basically ventilating into the crawl space. So this house is in a state now that we feel much more needs to be done. Why I called it an anomaly earlier, just to give you a little bit of backstory here as a reminder. About 20 years ago, we, for all intents and purposes, provided this structure for the resident through a mortgage, through an owner-occupied rehab. That's how it was done at the time, for about $57,000, and that's the mortgage that is held on the property right now. Through a number of events, the property's in the condition it's in now, requiring us to go back. She and her family are past the original HUD owner-occupied rehab time period, so the clock is sort of restarted. She has the same eligibility as any other resident to come in, as long as they're income eligible and ask for assistance. So that's why we're back here, basically. It's been 20 years, she's there. And so she came in. I do want to also say that she's been getting some help from her church community. We've been in communication with her for quite some time. I've been in touch with the social services community to make sure that we're doing, there's sort of making sure everything is where it needs to be there. So we do feel that we need to proceed with work here. We started work. We have not expended $28,000 yet, but we started work and have stopped work until we have this matter before you, because we're at the point now, we don't feel like we can walk away, if you will, and we do need to spend some more money. We do need your approval for that, however. So there are a lot of issues that we've discussed as a staff this week. Relocation, we do have to be mindful of the Uniform Relocation Assistance Act of 1970, which requires, because this is a federally funded project originally, that the relocation assistance would have to be comparable. There's expenses related there. There is the lack of availability of comparable housing for her. She also has pets. So there's federal law we need to be mindful of there and the expense of that.
Clarification, does that mean permanent relocation? Go to another, forget that house, just relocate to another location permanently, not just temporarily?
Yes, if
You're
we
referring
were to permanently rehouse her, and,
Permanently, okay.
and because she is a homeowner,
Right,
there's
yeah,
a little,
to another home.
there are stipulations there too.
Thanks.
So, at the end of the day, our recommendation is that we proceed with this. I do want to note that there's another rehab out there, just to give you some comparison for how we approach these. There's another rehab where are going to be telling the resident that we're not able to help them, because what we know right now from the estimate originally is it's going to be way over what the cap is, exceeding $120,000, and so we are telling them, we're sorry, we're not able to help you. And so this one is a little different. We hold the mortgage on the property. We had started work there. We don't feel like it's in a position to sort of walk away, if you will. I don't want to overstate that, because no one on this commission or on staff is interested in seeing a resident sort of walking away from anyone. That's not what I'm trying to say, but for us to stop work now, I think would, the better thing to do, everybody's trying to do the right thing, so the better thing to do would be to continue the work in our estimation when we cost it all out, and by putting a second mortgage on the property to do that. So we do have to be mindful that she is the homeowner and not a rental tenant. And so with that said, ask for your consideration. Mr. Hewitt has pictures. I'll defer to Barry to see if he has anything else you want to say. Both of these guys are structural experts and can exceed my knowledge of that. So I'll just ask them if there's anything else they want to say about the property.
I do have photos throughout the program if you are interested in seeing sort of visual representation of what we've had going on with the property. I can share my screen, I think.
And this will be, Barry's, this will be largely, all new structures with the walls, the insulation, the heat, sort of overhauling the house, if you will, rather than just the different repairs that would take place. So,
and I should have brought a mouse with me instead of clicking on the thing.
Mice are already there.
Yeah, so let's get this thing up out of the way so that I can. No, so here we're seeing sort of the shape of what in the foreground here is a doorway, or this is the bottom of the door, which has been basically damaged. Here we've got the corner of the living room where the ceiling was actually a tree came through that, and her church group took care of that particular part of the problem. So the roof has been re-roofed over what was existing. They fixed the hole from the inside and then re-roofed new shingles.
No insurance involved? Did not have insurance on the house?
My understanding is that she had insurance on the house, but I think that the church helped her with getting this repair done, whether it was through the insurance or through.
Seems like the insurance would have covered that.
Yes, I would assume so, but I don't know. I don't actually know the 100% that answer. So, let's see. When we started, she part of the problem was the electricity, the electrical outlets, and a number of the lights fixtures in the property don't work. What you see here is someone has covered holes in the wall with a shingle. I pulled that shingle off to see sort of what was going on behind there. The insulation in this particular wall was tattered, but somewhat there. The electrical wiring was in place. It didn't look damaged from what I could see without tearing the whole wall out. But removing the shingle showed me that the wiring was in place. I wasn't certain if someone hadn't crawled into her crawl space and removed wiring from underneath the trailer, or from underneath the modular home, but that wasn't the case. The wiring is in the walls. I just was not. There was no visible problem with it. There's one of the windows that we had listed to be replaced. You can see how it's not fitting properly, and that window was just basically the sash was sitting there. Wasn't physically attached to anything. The spring devices that hold it in place were missing. Here's a view of the back side of the house with the stair from the deck into the garden. Here's sort of the wall. That's another view of the bathroom that you saw the door in. So the house was very dirty and needed us to get in there and clean out and remove a lot of the stuff that was there to figure out what was going on. This view shows the kitchen floor during the time that it was being cleaned, and there's a sheet of plywood that's there in front of the sink cabinet, which is in the background. This is the cabinet where the sink is, and this is just a sheet of plywood that was laid on the floor to make it so that someone didn't fall through into the crawl space.
Is the homeowner living in the house?
Yes.
In these pictures?
Yes, she was.
It's almost completely cleared out.
So there was an issue with a family member in hoarding that was then, they, as a family, got rid of all of the stuff that was in the house, the excess, and it was down to just a couple of chairs and the bare minimum, a couple of dressers and, a television. So, here we see after a lot of nearly all of the things were taken out of the house. Sort of the view where the roof had been leaking, so the ceilings were in need of repair, but we were not able to see what was really in there except for to try and shine a flashlight up into the openings, the 2 holes that have been shown here. Again, these were photos that were taken when we had someone in there actually cleaning that out. There's some of the debris. So here we're into the point. So we got a bid for the repairs that were visible to the eye, knowing that we were going to come into more things that we couldn't see and didn't just tear out the walls to find out what was there. Now this photo is during the repair phase when the rotting subfloor has been pulled off and has fallen into what they call like an underbelly. There's an actual membrane holding the insulation and the heat duct and all that information. A very durable fabric that's fastened to the bottom of this structure, so that when you're traveling down the highway at 60 miles an hour, all the ductwork doesn't get blown out, all the insulation doesn't get pulled out of the bottom of the structure. So everything that you see here in these photos is sort of laying on this membrane, and it's just kind of bellied down and holding up what's in the place. So as we got in here, you can see sort of the damage that rodents had caused to the ductwork in the house. Sort of quite extensive, and this, we again had some clue that there was going to be damage there, but no real way of telling how extensive it was until the subfloor was taken out so that we could begin the repairs.
Is this a modular home to begin with?
This was a modular home to begin with, yes.
Can we afford to put that much money into a modular
A
home in that?
manufactured home, right? That's different than modular, right? It's a manufactured home.
Yes, it was brought in 2 sections, placed together, so, but
so that is
manufactured
modular.
in a building and brought here and sat on a foundation. Yes,
Okay, so
manufactured.
sounds like modular. Thank you.
Yes.
And if I may, I mean, this is like, I was going to bring down before that it was a manufactured home. Manufactured homes are not built to the same specifications as a stick-built traditional home. But now that this is on the foundation and we have what we have to bring that up to today's code, which really is lending to the expense of this place, because there's basic structural elements to the house that are going to have to be required to be installed that weren't there before. So even if we were just doing a typical repair job, you would have to put those corner bracing in and that kind of thing to make the house stable. And by code, I mean, some of these things most of these building structures have to be upgraded. And that's why we're running into the problem. As they remove something, we find something else.
Right.
And it's due mainly to the rodents.
But can't you reach a point where you have to spend more than if you just replaced the whole thing?
Well,
You certainly
So
can.
far, not yet.
We're not there
Well,
yet.
that's what I was
But-
wondering.
How much would it cost?
The
to just-
replacement of, I mean, modular homes is, where they are now, we didn't find anything for under $150,000, for instance. That's, with the amount of time we had to look, that's
But
what we're
even after
looking
you
at.
spend all that money, the value of this is not comparable to a new one.
Yeah, we have to look
No,
at
that's
what our
correct.
return will be at the end of the day on this. So it's sort of the quandary.
I guess the
That's-
question that I
that's the
have,
quandary
I just
we're
want to
having is,
understand,
Where do you stop?
Because the
Yeah.
plumbing in that house is not the same as another house either. And eventually that deteriorates and has to be.
so just a quick question. So the homeowner owns this, she has title to this property, right? And the city is the lender on the property. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And the monies that are needed to be invested in this property, how do we know that there won't be additional monies down the road? How do we know that the care of this property will be such that, we won't be talking about this again?
Sure. Well, we don't. We can't predict everything, as you point out. We would like to ask the resident to have annual or twice a year inspections, like we would. Well, we don't inspect rental properties more than once a year, but we would ask for stipulations like that, moving into additional a commitment here, because we understand it is a big one. She is the homeowner, so there are things like that we would ask, but you can't predict everything. We can do our best to monitor it that way. She does have folks she works with in our church community that are spending a lot of time at her house, and I think we could work with others to try to help.
So how do we, she could basically move in whoever she wants to in the future, correct?
If she could.
So there's really
She
nothing to
cannot-
do outside of inspection and then if we found a problem, what would be the recourse?
There's always foreclosure, but we have, obviously are reluctant to go down that road for obvious reasons. So that is one of the things there. Cody, do you have any other options? But that's really the only sort of legal one we could.
Suppose, if there was some kind of like abatement of what we found, like doing something related to cleaning it up, like fixing a problem that we anticipate there ourselves, but again, that would be putting more
Be a lien.
money into it at that point.
So really, we have no recourse. We can't really, there's no way to inspect it and have it be meaningful. Because if we inspected and had a problem, there's really nothing that we can require to do or.
No, unless it's a hazard to the neighborhood or there'd be some surrounding where it would be, we determine it to be unsafe. At which
So
point she would have
realistically,
to-
we could be spending this money and 3 years from now, spending a similar amount.
I can't disagree with your logic. I don't know if it'd be a similar amount, but I mean, there are risks involved with this for sure. And anytime we're rehabbing any homeowner-owned property, that's what we engage in that risk. This is a larger amount of money, but we do a lot of rehabs that are for homeowners, and we don't require these inspections. So it is assumption of risk. You're right about that.
How many times has the program put money into the same property after the first,
Mhm.
like after the first requirement
Yeah,
sunset?
it's pretty rare. I don't know. The compliance period is 15 or 20 years, so I'm not sure. John, I don't know that we've ever put one in twice that I know of, but we'd have to go do some research, Sarah.
I don't believe that I'm aware of another property where we've gone back and done something like this. I'm not aware of a precedent.
So how many times have we put money into this particular property?
Once.
So
the
once
last
before
time.
now?
Yeah, we did put money in earlier this summer. We did start the work that I told you about, which is part of this, but once prior, John, was when we did the original construction of the modular, right?
Correct.
It was,
2001.
there was just, yeah, she was living in, I think, what could be determined to be unsafe structures on the property with her family, and those structures were removed, and this was the option on a foundation.
So the city or RDC, or whatever it was 21 years ago, bought a new modular home and made a foundation and put it on, stuck together and said, put electricity and hooked it up.
Yes.
Ew. Okay.
Can I just clarify, just for vocabulary? I've heard people use both modular and manufactured, and those are two different kinds of construction. Which one are we talking about for this?
Does this have a title, or does it have an actual, because manufactured home is a title. This is not a titled property.
Cody, do you know if it's titled?
I say, yeah, it does have title. Like, I mean, it's not a vehicle title like a mobile home.
It should be a land title. Once it's
Yeah.
affixed to the foundation, it
Right.
likely became a titleable home, like real estate, as opposed to a mobile home or something like that that is still capable or theoretically capable of being moved would be titled via the DOT. So.
Because I agree there's a difference between a modular home and a manufactured home. And it sounds like this is a manufactured home
It was put
that's
on a
been put on a
foundation.
permanent foundation, which
has-
can be mortgaged.
Yes, it has 2x6 exterior walls and floor joists span, that follow the span requirements from a code. It didn't have, wheels and a thing that, a towing bar at the front as part of it from the factory. Those were placed there as part of moving it, not permanently affixed from the factory.
So, again, clarification, that manufactured on a foundation. Again, because modular and manufactured just have different construction standards in addition to whether they're on a foundation or not, because frankly, most mobile homes don't have wheels and a pole bar on them, right? They don't. Even if, anyway, so I just wanted to know in terms of using the terminology consistently, because that helps me understand what we're talking about.
Okay.
So for someone who doesn't understand the difference between the two, what is the difference between the two depending on which this building is? How does it relate to us in RDC, whether it's the one or the other?
Well, I think to President Canari's question was, does it make a difference on the title? We've determined this is a titled real estate property because it's on a permanent foundation. As to the original construction, I would say that the sort of evolution of that industry has changed, and that manufactured homes are maybe, depending on the size, they're manufactured in pieces and brought in and constructed in different ways. This 20 years ago was a modular. You said it was brought in a couple of pieces or
Yes, but
and put on there.
to answer the question, at this point, it is neither a modular nor a manufactured home. It is now a home on a foundation that must meet the requirements of the International Residential Code as adopted by the state of Indiana, and then therefore the city of Bloomington. So
That status changed when it was put on the foundation, you're saying, is that what?
correct, and
made it?
as we are working on it now, during one of the discussions at the site with the contractor and the electrician last week when we were soliciting more information and costs, we had the building commissioner from Monroe County there at the site, and basically his point was, whatever this was when it got set on this site, it is now required to meet. Because you're giving a building permit to make these repairs, you are now working on a home that must meet the requirements of the International Residential Code, which is what applies to single-family homes. So,
really important.
yes, and I guess I should have maybe answered the counselor's question with that answer at the time, instead of sort of sitting here with a stupid look on my face. So, yes, at this point, some of the things that we have to, as Barry mentioned earlier, some of the things that we have priced and asked for bids for are those very specific things that are required to make certain that this house does now meet the requirements of the building code.
Would that be
What-
appropriately called a retrofit?
Possibly,
And-
yes.
Okay, just again,
Yes,
in
it
terms
would-
of, because it didn't meet IRC when it was placed on the foundation, but because of the rehab that's being done now, it needs to be retroactively brought up to that standard.
Correct, and the building permit that the contractor applied for last week as part of this process was for a remodel. There's an actual term for it, but it is basically, as you say, retrofit, making it, bringing it up to current code because of the extensive nature of the work that's being done. As Barry said, something about lateral bracing. This building was constructed in a building, and every piece of it that went together was glued and stapled together. And so as they take it apart, they're removing glue from all of the structural members, and then replacing that glue as they would with screws and glue in a new home. But the nature of removing the glued on drywall is then going to require some lateral bracing be put in to replace the glue that provides structure to the building.
So it doesn't really sound like we have very many options here, right? How many manufactured homes have been bought or developed for homeowners through this program?
Would be the only one that
Okay.
I know of. John may know something different, but most of the time we are rehabbing existing structure, single-family homes
Not building new ones.
in the city. And the owners are required to be income qualified, and so the type of house could vary quite a bit. But most of the time it's an existing structure, which in Bloomington, in the city of Bloomington, are mostly older.
Yeah.
Kind of stick-built
1920
construction at this point that would
buildings.
need a rehab. So a lot of times we're dealing with for owner-occupied rehab is like a foundation issue. HVAC is pretty low for owner-occupied rehab. I know we're dealing with a foundation now. There's roofs. We also have the home modification for accessible living, where we can help those who may need improvements on property for access.
So there's no other alternative housing that meets the definition or requirement that's out there and available currently?
Not that we could find in the time period we are dealing with here. I did talk to the Housing Authority. There's a Section 8 availability right now, I think. To the extent possible, it would behoove us to see what things look like long-term for the resident. And we're happy to sort of pursue that. We started down that path, but knowing that there wasn't anything immediate, we sort of had to manage our time, but did talk about that, and we do have to respect her right as a homeowner. What we could do, sort of, she wants to stay there and has the right to stay there, then, the goal of the rehab programs is to preserve home ownership and keep people in their homes and try to do that safely. It's, a lot of the issue here is safety, thanks Barry. And so we're trying to make sure that's where it needs to be, so.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
Yeah.
It is.
I feel like we're throwing good money after bad, and definitely don't want to be in that situation. On the flip side, you don't want to see someone living in unsafe, conditions, etc. So this one's a tough one for me, but it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like that there's other viable alternatives that are out there in the short run.
Well, I will say that in the interest of what kind of precedent we set here, it's, it was very instructive for me to hear at the very same time we were dealing with this, we'd started here, and this other house, we had said at the outset, we can walk in here and see that there's no feasible way we can work on this property for the amount of money that we typically invest in this program. This one's a little different because of the interest in the property we already have and what we'd already started, and I do think that sets it aside a little bit of us telling another homeowner, unfortunately, we can't help you. There's just no feasible way here. So these happen simultaneously, and that was at least instructive for me. Yeah.
So with this house, if there was no history, It's a house with a homeowner and in condition, comparing it to the one you just rejected, that we would not do any work to help them, because it was in such bad shape. If you knew all this stuff that you know now, and there was no history, would you have said no to it too as a staff?
Even if we knew, and
If it was a
we
mess,
really have to
you know,
say.
you really knew all this
Yeah, if this were.
physical stuff, how disastrous it is.
Yeah.
To $100,000 plus the first $28,000.
No, it's not the first.
It's included. Yeah, it's included.
Oh, that's
So,
inside.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, 28,000 is
75,000
part of, yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
would you have looked at all that and said, no, that too is too much? There was no history.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd like to say, yeah, we would have said no. They're also individual. I think under current logic, we would have probably made a strong case for saying we're just not able to do anything here. If we'd known everything at once. But you know, we really try to make these decisions collectively, consider everything we possibly need to. So I would like to tell you that, yeah, I would have made the same decision, recommendation, I should say. But they all are, everyone is individual, and
But that's important, for me, that's informative about the condition of the place.
Yeah.
Not history, but the condition of the place
Sure.
right now.
I have
And
one more.
With this one here, this was progressive. We did not know in the beginning
Right.
we were going to have to do X and then Y.
Right, it just
One
kept
thing just
unfolding.
led into the other as we tore off, you know, one section of the building. Then you could make that assumption throughout the building.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you found something, and you know, so it's to be able to say what we projected in the very beginning. If we would know now what we knew, you know.
Yeah.
I think, you know, John is 100% correct. I think we probably would have said we can't really do anything for you.
But it was not.
We're at the position now that one thing just kept leading to another, and one thing had to be fixed before we could go on to the next part, to even get us back to the beginning that we went there.
Sure. Thanks.
So I have just a quick question, which is that the minimum is listed here, and the resolution is a little over $80,000, and then it says plus 10% contingency, and then you're requesting not to exceed 100,000, which is more than that plus the 10% contingency. So are you just wanting to make sure you don't have to come back to us on this property at all? So you've added in extra cushion.
Yes, that's to make sure that we're all said and done here. And just again, to reiterate Commissioner Hutton's question, the 28,000 that I've talked about is part of this. It's not, that's not separate. We just have already expended some of that
Right.
prior to because of
doing
the
that stuff.
previous, we were under the ceiling on the cap on the program, so yeah.
And then my only other question is, given the change and the substantial change in the scope of work, is there any requirement to go back out and bid it further? Because I know you said you only had one bid. Is that an issue, or is it not an issue? It doesn't need to be considered.
We're okay there because we did award the bid to a contractor, and then these are just change orders under the same contract. So, you know, we feel like we vetted that at the beginning. If you recall, we did have some trouble getting folks to accept the bid, and some work was required prior to that to get the work started. So we feel pretty comfortable with our process on that.
All right. Any other questions from commissioners? Any question or any comment from the public on Resolution 22-91? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Sarah Bowerly Danson, I motion to approve Resolution 22-91.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No.
All right. Resolution 22-91 passes. Any business general discussion tonight? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Moved.
So second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.